First of all, I want to take back something I said in the announcements. In some Christian churches, this may be Low Sunday. But when I look around the sanctuary this morning, this is obviously not Low Sunday here at MCC Toronto. I think my announcement last Sunday that this was going to be the gayest sermon I ever preached got your attention. The research that I'm sharing with you this morning and basing a lot of the first part of my sermon on is research that compiles a variety of different studies. So this is just not one individual's opinion or one individual study. And it certainly doesn't present just one answer to the issues I'm going to be raising. When I said it was going to be the gayest sermon I've ever preached, I knew that some GLBT folks in the church would get concerned that it was going to be so gay that it would leave out heterosexual people and be somewhat alienating. And I have to say to you that down through the years, very seldom has a heterosexual person ever come to me and said that this church is too gay or talks too much about gay stuff. It's almost never, I can count on one hand in 40 years the number of times that's happened. I've more frequently, though, had some GLBT people come to me and say they wish the church wasn't quite as gay as it was in terms of our pastor. In terms of the issues we raise, our involvement in pride, the political stuff, etc. But when I check in with heterosexual folks in the church, they seem fine. They get it. They understand. And they're generally very, very fine with our approach. I also want to clarify that I'm kind of from the old school. And while I have worked really hard to be saying LGBTQ throughout my sermon, I will probably occasionally slip into gay language. And please help me to translate that in your own mind that I'm not talking about gay men when I use gay language. If I'm referring to gay men in my sermon, I will be specific, but I mean LGBTQ folks, so I will do my best to do that. I also want to remind us of a scripture that I think at MCC Toronto we don't focus on enough. And I recently heard another pastor's sermon where she was absolutely brilliant in terms of how she used this. That we are to, Jesus said, there are two commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is likewise unto the first. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Loving our neighbor. And when they asked Jesus, well, who's our neighbor? He went on to tell them the story of the Good Samaritan, which indicated that our neighbor is anyone, anywhere in need. And so we are to be loving people around us and around the world who are in need. So, the gayest sermon I've ever preached. You know the roots of this church. This church was founded in the 1960s in California to ensure that gay and lesbian in those days, people, had a safe place to worship. And it quickly grew around the world, and it quickly grew in terms of welcoming more diversity into the church, welcoming more, very quickly, heterosexual people into the church. But the roots of our denomination and this local church have been in the gay community, the lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. You know our commitment to spirituality, that the main core of most of the sermons, week after week, is a spiritual lesson for life that's applicable to everyone. And that social justice themes are added when it's appropriate from time to time. You know our commitment to inclusion. While we recognize our roots in the LGBT community, we expand our arms to all. We have heterosexual members of our church, staff of our church, board members of our church, deacons of our church. Heterosexual people involved in all aspects of our church. And in general, heterosexual people here who used to say, it's the gay church where I attend, now say, it's the Christian church where I belong. From time to time, we address LGBTQ issues, community issues, like human rights advances, the transgender bill, or like this morning when we talked about Chechnya. Today is one of those days, one of those occasional days, where the sermon, one of those very seldom days, where the sermon heavily addresses a crisis in society at large. It's applicable beyond, but it's disproportionately impacting the LGBT community. And that's why I'm addressing it. And what would a spiritual response be to this crisis? As we have progressed through human rights and legal achievements in Canada, it's been hard work, sometimes frustrating work, but usually very exciting work. And our church has consistently played a key role along with others. We have been there. We've used petitions and press conferences, protests and lobbying, hunger strikes, civil disobedience, etc., to advance the cause. We've been called to defend the LGBT community from attacks, like in the late 70s, Anita Bryant, or gay bashing, or police violence, or the bath raids, or the HIV/AIDS epidemic, or religious opposition, etc., etc. And we've been called not just to defend, but to advance legal and human rights protections. We fought for inclusion of sexual orientation in the Ontario Human Rights Code, where we could get job protection so we couldn't be fired just for who we were. Or we could get housing protection so we weren't kicked out of our homes when the superintendent found out that we were gay or lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. We fought for relationship recognition so that couples had the right to visit each other in hospital, because often we were denied because we weren't defined as family, especially in intensive care. And for adoption, so that particularly we could co-parent our own children, or for pension rights. And then we fought for equal marriage, for the freedom to be able to choose to marry. Now, as more and more GLBT people came out, and as we received more and more legal advancements, we thought we were making life better. Better and better and better for LGBTQ people, we thought, and for our families, for our friends, for our allies. All of that is true, to some extent. However, here's the challenging news. Even for LGBTQ people who were never experienced being bullied, who've never experienced name-calling, who've had no experience of overt discrimination, there has been no noticeable decline in death by suicide, or rates of depression, or rates of anxiety, or a host of other health issues in 40 years. No decline in the LGBTQ community. Well, there have been declines in some of those areas in society at large, not in the LGBT community. The numbers have been shockingly high compared to our heterosexual counterparts. No change in 40 years. Yes, finding church in Wellesley, finding our own space, great. Coming out to family and being accepted, wonderful. Coming out to friends, great. Co-workers, yes. More legal advancements, absolutely great. And yet, the divergence between heterosexual community and the LGBTQ community on these statistics, particularly death by suicide, hasn't changed. No improvements. I want to thank Michael Hobbs for his research in the article that pulled a variety of studies together. The article is entitled "Together Alone." And we'll be putting that article on our website and linked in e-news this week. I want to thank him because of the statistics and the insights he pulled together that I'm using as the basis for the first part, or most of the part, of this lesson for life. Depending on which study you look at, the LGBTQ community is twice to 10 times more likely to die by suicide than heterosexual folks. Twice as likely to have a major depressive episode. And among the LGBT community, the statistics are the highest by far among gay men and probably even higher among trans folks. And it's a study recently of gay men who just moved to New York City, who just got there. The study found that 3/4 of them suffered from anxiety or depression, abused drugs or alcohol, were having high-risky sex, or a combination of all three. 3/4 of them. And the study found that most LGBT people have fewer friends, fewer close friends, than their heterosexual counterparts. And all of these studies were true in Canada, the US, the Netherlands, and Sweden, countries studied. Now, you know my role and this church's role for equal marriage and the success that we had. And yet, for many people, equal marriage was a letdown. It left them still feeling unfulfilled. In a similar way that refugees who come to here from awful situations, many of them, arrive in Canada and expect everything to be great and experience letdown, still feeling unfulfilled and very high rates of health issues. I want to quote the article revised slightly. It is still dangerously alienating, key phrase, dangerously alienating to go through life as an LGBTQ person. The good news, the study says, is that epidemiologists and social scientists are getting closer than ever to understanding all of the various reasons why this is so. What we thought hasn't been true. What society thought hasn't been true. In the 50s and 60s, society said all of these issues are because of homosexuality itself. Found out not to be true. Then we thought it was the loneliness of the closet. And what we found is, as people come out, they experience more isolation. Then we thought it was the rejection of family and friends. And it wasn't true. What the researchers are beginning to believe is that the key is what they call, not the only thing, but the key, minority stress. Being part of a marginalized group requires a lot more work, and it can be exhausting. If you're the only woman in a business place, you know what I mean. It can be exhausting. If you're the only black person on a university dorm, you know what I mean. It can be exhausting. And LGBTQ people start dealing with this when they're 12 or 13 years old. And there's no one to talk to. And the real damage is done in the first 5 years. So that's from you're 12 to 17 years old. In the first 5 years between recognizing your sexual orientation and starting to tell other people about it. I was 9 years old. So for me, from 9 to 14, is the period when I experienced most of the damage. Even small negative events during that period, even just what might seem small negative messages during that period, have huge, ongoing impact because we start to expect it. We start to expect the rejection or the comments. And so we start adjusting our behavior. We become something other than who we are in order to avoid the attacks or the rejection. And here's what really, really shocked me. As we grow older, and as we find the LGBT community, then we in the LGBT community make it worse for each other. The very place and the very people that we hope to find safety and healing and love make it worse. The easy access to sex makes it worse. The use of social media and hookup apps almost always make it worse. It increases the level of rejection, and everyone experiences this so much, we almost become numb to it. And the use of sex to get something that isn't there makes it worse. The use of sex for social support and companionship makes it worse. Coming out important, yes. Finding community, yes. But still, there's a sense of not fitting in. And still, the anxiety and the depression rates are even higher for people out of the closet than for people in the closet. Because, and I quote, the gay community just slaps the idealism out of you. For some, it felt like entering into a jungle when they found the community, being treated like a piece of meat, being constantly exposed to sarcasm and put-downs, experiencing overt discrimination in your own community because of your weight or your race or your income or your ability. Troy Perry, the founder of our denomination, once said, "How quickly the oppressed become the oppressor." And if we listen to the routine, as much as we may love the drag community and what they've done in fundraising and entertainment they provide, just listen to some of the routines of the drag queens. And the meanness is almost pathological. It's symptomatic of how we see ourselves and treat each other. And look at the online comments that people make in their profiles. No blank need apply. The in-group discrimination is devastating. Just ask Black LGBT people about the discrimination they feel in the LGBT community. In-group discrimination. Being discriminated or rejected by people in your own community hurts more than when it comes from outsiders. And in particular, the research says, the damage gay men do to each other is worse. Male-on-male violence. And it's especially damaging and directed towards the more effeminate men among us. And so what happens in those early years when we begin to learn to change our behavior and to change who we are? And some people gay men try to butch it up to fit in. Some lesbians try to soften their masculinity to fit in. And effeminate gay men have the highest rate of death by suicide and loneliness and mental illness of any segment. And the trends in social media have contributed to making the problem even further worse. Apps like Grindr and Scruff, which are gay male hookup apps to meet other gay males, have replaced the bars and the nightclubs and the bathhouses so that people aren't socializing with others, they're trying to connect one-on-one. In the year 2000, 20% of gay people met online. 10 years later, 2010, it was 70%. And yet at the same time, the percent met through friends went from 30% down to 12%. People who are on Grindr, one of the gay apps, the most popular one, on average spend 90 minutes a day on that app and experience 99% rejection. Can you imagine spending 90 minutes every day experiencing 99% rejection and what that does to you over time? And it's worse for gay men of color. So what does this all mean to society and to the church? I'm going to present some solutions, but you're going to hear the answer in the anthem that's being sung to you in a few minutes. So here are some of the solutions. Number one, for society, it's crucial that we get at this in schools. It's crucial that young kids have education, positive discussion, that it's not silence. That percentage of kids who are bullied because of sexual orientation, in the year 2015, that percent was exactly the same as it was in 2005. In 10 years, we've made no progress. We have got to have spaces where it's open and it's positive, where LGBT kids can get together and have discussions and make friends. And it can't just be in high school, it's got to be in middle school as well, if we're going to reach kids by the time that they're 12 or 13 years old. Secondly, LGBTQ youth. We have to have places like the Triangle Program. We have to have places like our young adults group, where people can be together, form community, find friends, and also talk about these issues. Now, most people here in church don't fit into either one of those groups. We're all a little older than can fit into the young adults group. So what about us? We bring minority stress with us into adulthood. And we often don't even recognize the damage that it does to us and the impact that it has on our friendships and our relationships. But the exciting thing is that there's beginning to be in various US cities an experiment where they're taking cognitive behavioral therapy and adapting it to be LGBT friendly and LGBT focused, and having support groups that are professionally led, where people can talk about this, where they can name this. And what they're finding is a dramatic decline in the rates of anxiety, depression, hard drug use, risky sex in just 3 months, when people have a space to talk about it. So what can we do as a church? MCC Toronto, our work within the LGBT community is not just outside of Canada, as important as that is. It's also here at home in Toronto. Our work in the LGBT community is not done. We need to look at these issues more. And I will confess, and I feel awful, that I have significantly contributed to this silence. Because sometimes I think we've been so afraid of being labeled as the gay church that we've stopped talking about gay issues. And that has been a huge mistake. We can welcome everybody, we can deal with all kinds of issues, we can be an inclusive church, and we can still address issues that are disproportionately impacting the LGBT community. So I have a challenge to you. One, everyone, gay or straight, let your uniqueness shine. Don't take off that edge to try to fit in and hide. May this become more and more and more a place where the differences and the uniqueness that each of us bring can be celebrated and welcomed and cherished. Secondly, we need some strong leaders with good skills to come forward and to restart what we had years ago, a singles group. We need places where single folks can be together, maybe find a partner, maybe not, but hopefully find a group of friends. Now, it may be challenging, because this needs to be a group that's not just a gay male group. It needs to be for gay men and lesbians, transgender folks, and heterosexual single folks. So we may have to have those little labels. Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm straight. I'm so-and-so, I'm gay. I'm so-and-so, and I'm this. Because otherwise it could get a little tricky. Okay? But all of us, whether we're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered, all of us, including our heterosexual friends here, need to remember that there is an epidemic happening, and we need to renew our passion for outreach. There's an epidemic of loneliness and alienation and isolation that has an impact of a dramatic, disproportionate rate of death by suicide, anxiety, depression, addiction, and risky sex. We need to remember what our middle name is. Metropolitan. We need to put the community more as the focus of metropolitan community churches. We need more places for people to meet friends. More places where everyone knows your name. More places where you feel like you can belong. You know, I was raised a strict fundamentalist Baptist, and I treasure much of that background. There were some challenges, but I treasure much of that background. And one of the things I remember is the passion that they instilled in me for an old-fashioned word called evangelism, where we wanted to get out there and save souls from dying and going to hell. And so we would do lots of things to invite friends to church and do. Moderate and progressive churches have lost their passion for evangelism. And folks, we need to renew that passion. We need for you to go from this place and to reach out to others, to reach out to gay and lesbian people, to reach out to trans people, to reach out to heterosexual people, and invite them in, because we have part of the answer to this situation. We have the opportunity for people to find community, to find meaning, and to find faith that can help. What's missing is we need more ambassadors who are passionate about saving lives. And so I ask you to go from this place, and I ask you to be passionate. Because when you invite someone to church, it's just not so Brent can tick another number off and say we're growing. When you invite someone to church, you may be saving their life. Like someone may have saved your life by inviting you here. MCC Toronto, our work in the LGBT community is not done. Let us recognize our roots while we open our arms, and let us become ambassadors of good news and hope and healing and reconciliation in our world. Let's go from here and get out of the church closet and tell the world that there is a place that says, welcome home, and means it. Amen.